The word hyperbole has served us well over the years in rationalizing Jesus' teachings. It allows us to interpret his teaching as an ideal and thus makes it less challenging. We also search for other meanings of the word perfect, so perhaps it doesn't mean exactly what we have been taught it means. After all, it only occurs twice in the Gospels, both in Matthew, and we can substitute covenant fidelity, steadfast love, my personal favorite from the Psalms, blamelessness, holiness, and merciful in the words of Luke, all of which sound less daunting than perfect. It might be helpful to look at it in context. Matthew's Gospel, we know, was written for a mixed Jewish-Gentile community, perhaps in Antioch, and certainly after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 A.D. Much has been believed and written about who the author might have been, but that person remains, to most scholars, unknown. The author's community may have been one that was originally predominantly Jewish, but becoming more and more Gentile. Questions of importance to the Jewish Christians, what fulfillment of the law means, who Jesus is and with what authority does he speak, as well as the conflicts with the religious authorities, are central. We also know that by Jesus' time, the rabbis had been finding an eye for an eye too harsh and tended to replace it with fines. But the concept of corresponding restitution remained, and we live with it today in sentencing guidelines. We find this challenging and difficult teaching in the first of the 5 discourses in Matthew, which opens with Matthew's version of the Beatitudes. Known, of course, as the Sermon on the Mount, it is addressed, notably, not only to the disciples, but to the entire crowd, which we might understand as including you and me. Matthew presents Jesus as a new Moses and or a new Solomon, but certainly a new wisdom figure, a teacher, and a liberator. For this reason, it is key that the sections from verses 531 to today's passage, 543 to 548, begin with, "You have heard that it was said to your ancestors, but I say to you." Thus, teachings which present moral progress beyond an eye for an eye. Those of you who have been at Holy Trinity for a long time will remember a day when Jim English, preaching on the parable of the workers in the vineyard, who were all paid the same wage, regardless of how many hours they had worked, he asked the children, "Is that fair? Is God fair?" To which they responded loudly, "No." And Jim responded, "Well, aren't we fortunate?" You have to wonder about the conversations that sparked in the car on the way home from church. Today, we have another example of "my ways are not your ways," and another time when we might respond as Jim did, "Well, aren't we fortunate?" In this time of war, dislocation, mass shootings, and hunger, how are we to deal with the challenge to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us? The challenge that Jesus presents to you and me. For it is a challenge to you and me. Think about the numerous examples in our world of people we might ask to love their enemies or pray for those who persecute them. I don't have to even suggest any. They come easily to mind. We easily think about all Ukrainians, all Afghan women, all those mothers and fathers and spouses and others who lost loved ones to gun violence. we easily put that challenge on them. And on the macro, faraway level, the challenge seems all but impossible. And we quickly revert to, it's just hyperbole anyhow. Jesus didn't really mean that. But what about on the micro level of my family, my daily life, my workplace, my parish? One-to-one, it is possible, with honest, intense prayer and self-examination, to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us, to grow toward that perfection to which Jesus calls us, however we choose to define it. God is so generous with grace, if only we ask for it and truly mean it. As Jim would say, well, aren't we